think I'd like to start at the point where I found out I was pregnant and knew vaguely that I would like to have a home style birth, but didn't have any concept of what that really was. Just vaguely knew that that was better, but didn't have any detailed understanding. And found out that locally there was a hospital that allowed a home style birth. And I kind of settled for that and thought, well, that seems okay. And I felt very fortunate that at the moment when I was became pregnant, I was starting to kind of work out what it is I wanted. I was in the company of a woman who just had a home birth and had done it with Crescenda and with Erica, and knew about Crescenda. And she kind of steered me in a direction without spelling it out to me what it is I need to prepare for and how I really, really don't want to be in a hospital no matter what. And I began to understand the difference between a birth in a hospital, even if it's a home style, and a genuine home birth. And it just took me on this different direction, and I discovered that I knew nothing about birth, and that it was almost like I'd been brought into an esoteric group, like a special club where you learn about physiological birth, because I hadn't learned about it anywhere else. So that was a real eye-opener. So when I was like, oh, okay, now I understand, I want a home birth, which means I have to find a home. I didn't have a place that I could have my home birth. And to avoid hospitals as much as I could. So this friend did for me, she gave me a few books, and one was Ina May's book about natural birth. And that was all the positive birth stories, and it really gave me a sense of how you need to trust the physiological process and be in your body, and how psychologically prepared you need to be, and how the space has to be really protected, and that any body in that space that isn't with you in a kind of spiritual sense can interrupt your ability to give birth. And so that meant I had to learn about ourselves as a physiological, an animal, back to our primitive state. So anyway, I got to that point and I was like, I definitely want to have a home birth, and now I understand why I need a doula or a midwife who understands this. And then I met Crescenda and realised that she was definitely the person that I wanted to give birth with. She had the same values as me, and she taught me so much in like a 20-minute conversation that I was like, God, I really need to understand this, because if I don't understand the process that I'm about to go through, someone else will intervene and take it over, and then I'm no longer in control. And I realised that I needed my sovereignty, and I also realised that if I ended up in a hospital, I can't be sure that the people who are with me will honour my sovereignty, will honour what my body needs at that moment. And my partner is fluent in Spanish and not very good at English, and I'm not very good at Spanish, so I needed to know that there was somebody there who understood me completely and would translate my needs properly, and also understood that every intervention that would come in a hospital would have consequences that were negative. Even though supposedly it's for my benefit and for the benefit of the baby, I was learning that there were negative consequences to intervention. So I had this big anxiety that I would end up in a hospital and there wouldn't be somebody to advocate for me. And I started to meet resistance in my partner, who didn't understand that a physiological birth is normal and that's natural, and that a hospital birth is a sort of a new addition to the birth process that actually intervenes with the natural process. So I kind of was in this difficult place where I had to justify why I needed to be in home and not in hospital. Anyway, after introducing my partner to Crescinda, she debunked the idea that a hospital was normal and that going into the birth process with an element of fear that there's going to be some kind of problem, that birth is a pathology, is a new thing, that is something that an institution like a hospital creates to avoid margins of error, like a risk that potentially could happen while you're giving birth. They put these interventions in place because they're scared of this tiny margin of risk, but they don't look at the holistic process of the birth, so this interferes with the process. So I had to work hard to convince my partner and a few other people out of the kind of orthodoxy of the hospital and tell them that this structure, this institutionalized structure that's been placed on top of the birth process isn't necessarily the best thing, and then learn what the best thing is, which I didn't know at the time. So doing a course about physiological birth and listening to a hypnotherapist who talks about how to put yourself in the right headspace made me realise what this process is going to be. So then at all costs I had to reject the interventions that were coming my way through the doctors, who were telling me I was at risk because I'm 43 years old and I have a geriatric womb and that I have some sort of signs of what are they called? Cystic ovaries. Yeah. And that all these things were huge problems that meant I'm probably going to have a cesarean. And so after week 20, once I'd had a couple of scans, I spoke to Crescinda and I told her that I had maybe 4 scans and I was due for another and then another. And she's like, you haven't even passed week 20, you've had nearly 6 scans. This isn't necessary. And this fear-mongering that you're at risk isn't necessary because you're healthy. You have no risk in your body. There's no problems with you. So you don't need to worry about this anymore. You're safe. Your baby's good. Everything's healthy. You're healthy. It's done. You don't need to worry. If you want to have a scan towards the end to be sure, then that's up to you. You want to do certain blood tests. That's necessary. But after that, you don't need to keep checking in with this fear-based mentality that something might go wrong along the way. And to just sit with the process. So I did, and I trusted it, and it felt really empowering because it's quite arduous going to these checkups constantly, and it isn't necessary. So then I got into myself and recognised what I needed to do to have this birth, and that was like a mind-blowing experience because I truly started to trust in this ancient process that the body has known how to do since the beginning of time, and learn what that is and trust in every step of the way and not fear it, like embrace it because it's so powerful, and that I'm going to have that experience alone. Like it's me that's having that experience. I knew I could do it. I knew my body could do it because nature has been doing it. That's how it works. So then realizing to do that, I needed to create a space that I would need if I was in my primitive brain. So the hypnotherapy taught me that the brain is in different sections, and we have the early part of our brain, and then we have the neocortex, and that the environment that I'm in to give birth needs to make sure my neocortex is shut down so I don't think about anything. I'm not trying to make a decision. I'm in a place where I'm totally in my sort of primitive brain. I think it's called the limbic brain. So create a safe space, feel cosseted, feel unobserved, organise everything so you don't have to think, make a decision, be under any stress. Ensure that your partner understands this, if you're lucky enough to have a partner, and have your doula or birth assistant there as this kind of grounding force. And I realised how important it was to have somebody there that wasn't my partner, because this kind of triangulation of energy meant it took the pressure off you trying to work it out between yourselves, because you've got this third person here who's holding space, who knows the experience that you're going through, and you can just experience it, and the partner can just support you in that experience. So there's nothing more to do than to let it happen, knowing there's someone there who just keeps you focused in a way that's I don't know, like you're an athlete going through a sporting event. You know, you have to get in the zone, you can't think about anything else, you've got to be in your body knows what to do, you've got to trust the process. And that's how I felt, and having Krishinda there as the guide was just essential, because I never had to switch into the other brain, the other part of my brain. And my partner could relax because he's no longer responsible, and he doesn't have to have any fear around the process, because there's somebody there who knows, has wisdom, and gives you that kind of grounding. So I had a really incredible experience. I was able to find a beautiful place to do it. It was in a beautiful setting, so I was surrounded by nature, and I embraced that kind of primitive part of my humanity. So I was connected to nature in as more powerful way as possible, able to go outside, look at trees, and just go through the process. I just feel so fortunate that I was able to make this space that's necessary for a physiological birth, that was cosseted, protected, something that you couldn't achieve in a hospital. A hospital is not your home. There are many people coming and going. You're not truly in control. If you show signs that you're faltering or you don't think you can do it, there'll be an intervention waiting, and the intervention will come if they feel like it's necessary. You do have a choice, but in the end, you're in their place, and they will do what they think is necessary. So as long as you're in the hospital, you're not really in control. So I needed to be in control, I needed to know I was safe, I needed to know I was cosseted, and I needed to be in nature. And because I was so focused on what I wanted, I wasn't able to find it immediately, but eventually I found a place that I could afford, that was in nature, surrounded by trees, and we rented it for a month, which was a little bit of a risk, because if you are going with the process of a natural birth, you don't know when you're going to give birth. There's a window of a month. It's kind of like a guide, and there's no such thing as a due date. So if you want to give birth on a particular day, then you go and get an intervention. But if you want to give birth and let your body tell you when it's ready, then you allow space for that, which modern life doesn't really allow us to do. So I had the luxury of making space. I insisted on it, even though I don't have a lot of money, or I just made it happen. So we had a month in a house in a forest, and there was this slight fear that what if I'm waiting for 3 weeks and then I give birth and I only have a week left in this house to create that baby bubble, that essential part where you're just alone, bonding with your baby and creating those important physiological exchanges to create that bond. So once I was in the house, we spent a week kind of preparing it and making sure we had all the food and everything was good, and working out how things worked, and getting the place ready, like blacking out the windows and things like that. So I would be in my little kind of primitive cave, and after about a week I felt psychologically ready. I was like, okay, I'm ready now. We've got 3 weeks left in this place, so this is going to be perfect. And that night I started having contraction surges. So I don't know if it was kind of like, if I'm just lucky, or if I actually created a true sense in my physical self that I am ready. The same way a cat goes and finds a place and hides away and knows when she's ready. I kind of made sure my space was perfect, and my body went, now you're ready. And I felt this sensations get stronger and stronger, and went into labour, and Krishinda and Erica arrived, and it just seemed to, I don't know, it flew by. It was 20 hours, but it was just an intense roller coaster, something I've never experienced before, and it was incredible. And the whole time I remember thinking to myself, something the woman who's a hypnotherapist said, and she said, it's not pain. It isn't pain, it's something else. It's an energetic force. It's so powerful, you feel like it's going to overwhelm you, but it won't, because it's a creative force and your body can do this. So don't think it's pain, because as soon as you believe it's pain, your body responds in a way that stops the process. So you contract and you feel like you're going to be hurt, and then that makes it worse. So you have to kind of relax into it. And there was this brilliant, it's not even an analogy, it's a reality that this part of your body is a mirror image of what's happening down below. So if your throat is constricted because you're, then everything will constrict. If your throat is open and vibrating, like, then everything will open. So this kind of like the perineum is your philtrum, your throat is your cervix, this is your labia, so you're like a mirror image. And what's fascinating, I found out later, is that the first cells in the human body that are created are the cells of your philtrum and your perineum. And they're the cells that don't change. Like every other cell gets regenerated, but these ones kind of like are your core cells that stay there. And that's mind-blowing. And if you want to look further into it, the shape of the cells is the flower of life. So anyway, so I was like, okay, this core essence of my own creation, these cells and these cells are connected. And if I relax and open and vibrate deeply and resonate, and then everything else will flow, and just trust in that process. And I had this incredible experience. It was overwhelming, but I really, really embraced it. And because I was having a physiological birth, my body was able to make this complex cocktails of chemicals that is like a pharmaceutical company in your head, that means you get exactly the right dose of oxytocin and whatever else you need as you need it. So it stops you from feeling pain. If it is pain, you don't know it's pain, it's something else. And then when it got to the final, there was a point where I was physically exhausted, and I don't remember what that point was. And I did feel like I hadn't gotten anywhere. And I think I had a little collapse on the floor and a little, oh God, I'm not getting anywhere. And Crescenda put her hand on my back and just gave me that kind of like support, like a coach, like I'm going to do this. And she said, you thought that was difficult. It's going to get harder, but you can do this. And then the next phase came. Then my waters broke properly. Like there's a second phase of the waters broken. And there was like a pop, and then the real work began, which is when I had to engage the final breathing exercise, which I'd learned, which is different to the ones where you're having surges. This is where you actually have to use force to push the baby out, and it took me a good while to realise that I was not doing it correctly. So if you ever go into labour, practice this J breath, where you, and then with all your force pushing, helping the cervix, oh gosh, what's it called? I've forgotten what it's called, I can't believe. No. Oh God, what's it called? Uterus. So I had a visualization. I made several visualizations to help me kind of like get into the mindset of what was happening in my body. And for the uterus, I had a pink silk ruched curtain that was rising, because what I realized is that the uterus, when you have a surge or a contraction, it's the uterus muscles gathering around and pulling to the top. So it's like loosening the uterus into like a loose bag rather than a tight ball. And I imagine this ruched curtain made of silk just rising and relaxing. And then once all the muscles get to the top of the uterus, the force that's created is so powerful. I can't remember the number, but it's like an enormous amount of exertion that it can push. And then your breath needs to allow that to happen. So you bring your breath in and hold it so the exertion can happen with this incredible muscle that pushes your baby out. mind-blowing. And then shortly after the birth, I felt this ball in my body, sort of around here, and I was like, have I pulled a muscle? That's like a cricket ball in my body. And Christinda said, no, that's your uterus is just contracted back again, and soon it will sit back in its place. I was like, wow, it's like a creature. It's like something you'd see in the depths of the ocean. This creature that kind of expanded and did this kind of muscle activity and pushed and then contracted. It's just incredible. So if you don't know about this, if you don't know how it works, and you become pregnant and you are just used to the orthodoxy and the normalization that you go to a hospital, people tell you there are risks, you go, okay, I don't want the risks, and then you let them start the interventions, you're going to miss something, a potential that just transformed my sense of myself and my trust in nature. And afterwards, because of the chemicals it produced that my body naturally produced, I felt incredible. I felt like I'd done an Iron Woman competition. Like I felt like an athletic winner, and that's so empowering. So I feel like it's a taboo to say, really think about home birth, unless you are really at risk. Unless you really are, afraid of something going wrong. There's always that potential. And there's always the preparedness for that, but it's actually a really small margin of women who do have problems. And often when I hear of my friends who've gone to the hospital to give birth, it's almost like they're set up to have the intervention because the initial problem is they're not in the right environment in the first place. So there's an anxiety around that, and if there's any slight element of fear, then the hospital will intervene. So you don't have the opportunity to do it in your own time, to trust in the process, to get yourself in the right headspace, and know that we're lucky enough to have a medical system that can save your life if you're at risk. But to know that the risk isn't that great, and that you're risking something else if you kind of disassociate yourself from your ability to give birth naturally. I think society has lost something important, because I know that I was disassociated from my ability to give birth naturally. I didn't understand it at all. And I carry a lot of grief for many of my peers and friends who had really traumatic experiences, and I'm trying to look to see why that was, and it was normalised. Like, there's a very good chance you're going to have a really horrible time of it. And the amount of friends that I talked to who didn't know about their own ability to give birth and went to hospital, and it just kind of got swept along in a series of interventions, and the terrible time that they had of it, and the consequences that we don't really understand what the consequences are, and I think we sweep it under the carpet. But I think I don't want to say it, because then there are so many people who are grateful for the medical system and have happy, bouncy babies, and I don't know if I zoom out what the overview is, what the larger consequence is, but I feel like there is one. But I don't want to put people in a negative mindset that the kind of birth that they had some kind of negative consequence for them in the long term, because I don't know. It's just something I feel spiritually, that as a woman who was nearly steered away from having home birth, having one has given me so much insight and power that I would have missed out on if I hadn't have gone down that direction. So yeah, but yeah, it's a fine line to tread, because you don't want women to feel even more disempowered. But I think there needs to be a sea change, a cultural shift, where from an early age women accept that natural birth is normal and that they can do it, and to be grateful for intervention when it's absolutely necessary, but not at the level it is now. Statistically, it's very, very high, and that needs to change. That's something I do know.